Hello, seventh grade scholars. Today we are going to start off by reviewing nonfiction. So, nonfiction is based on actual events, real stuff. So, nonfiction based on actual events. Nonfiction is all around us. I just had a conversation. Thank you, Mrs. Rawlings. We had a nice conversation about what nonfiction is and how it's everywhere. So, let's just take a look at some of the things that are around us that we might not even consider as nonfiction. But academic papers. We've got dictionaries, we have book reports, we have diaries, journals, photographs, posters, uh, letters, textbooks, essays, speeches, your science book, your history books, self help books. There are all kinds of nonfiction all around us based on actual events. So we're going to be studying nonfiction for the next I was going to say 4 essays. We're still determining how that's moving forward, but we will be studying nonfiction. So remember, nonfiction is based on actual events and it comes in many forms. I'd like to give you a little foundation before we jump into this nonfiction piece. It's going to be a speech, and you'll have the opportunity to read it, listen to it, see some images that go with it. But I want to give you a little bit of the history. I'd like to introduce George C. Marshall to you. He was the Secretary of State for the United States during World War II. He was born in 1880, died in 1959. So what you want to know about George C. Marshall is he did something called the Marshall Plan. He presented the Marshall Plan. After World War II, Europe was left in ruins. So most of all the battles and destruction happened over in Europe. And so the United States was in a pretty good spot. People were hungry in Europe, their buildings were destroyed, the employment was high, banks and all kinds of companies suffered, and public transportation and roads were destroyed, demolished. And you can imagine why with warfare going on. So farmers couldn't farm, people couldn't feed their children or find work, and it was really a tough place to be in. Well, this George C. Marshall was aware of this and presented the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan was a proposal. So he proposed restoring European economy, that the United States would help Europe restore their economy after World War II by giving them foreign aid. Foreign aid just means support from a country or continent or whatever, not your own. So giving that foreign aid to those who need it in Europe. And within the budget, there was $13 billion, and it was spent on food and fuel and machinery and money just to send over to Europe and help them get back on their feet. And the cool thing was that the plan was a success. In 1951, the plan ended and all the funds were done, and Europe was able to recover more quickly. George C. Marshall presented this plan in 1947 at Harvard University. That's the speech that we are going to cover. That is the nonfiction piece that we are looking at for writing a précis. Let's go back into a little bit of information for the Marshall Plan from this video here. I think it was this one. Awesome. Play.
Hooray! World War II is over! But Europe is in ruins. What can a country like the United States do to help? How about setting aside over $13 billion to help rebuild the smoldering continent? That's what the European Recovery Plan, aka the Marshall Plan, sought to do. Restore the European economy by giving foreign aid to countries that needed it. It was a brilliant move to win the peace by George C. Marshall, the plan's creator. Marshall had been a career military man, and during the war had served as the Army's chief of staff. He oversaw the U.S. military strategy and was one of the key figures behind the Allied victory. Marshall retired from the Army at the end of the war, but President Truman valued his brains too much. After serving as ambassador to China, Marshall was appointed Secretary of State in early 1947. Soon after, he developed his European Recovery Plan and announced it in June of that year. From April 1948 to December 1951, the United States shipped food, fuel, machinery, and money to European countries. The goal was to help them get back on their feet after the devastation of the war. In one sense, this was good deed foreign policy. The United States was being a friend, using its considerable resources to help war-torn Europe. Plus, the last time the world left a conquered nation in ruins, Nazi Germany rose to power. But there were other reasons to implement the Marshall Plan as well. By investing in the economies of European countries, the U.S. helped create new markets for its exports. Perhaps we could interest you in a Buick. There was a strategic objective, too. The U.S. wanted to isolate the Soviet Union, to keep it from expanding its sphere of influence beyond Eastern Europe. How better to make capitalism appealing than to spread around money in a war-torn country? By the way, here are all the countries that received Marshall Plan aid in alphabetical order. Ready? Austria, Belgium, Denmark, France, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and West Germany. Now, if you listen closely, you might have noticed a couple of major European countries that weren't on that list. The USSR didn't trust the U.S. intentions with the Marshall Plan and forbade Poland and Czechoslovakia from receiving American aid. Too bad for them, because the plan worked. The gross national product of Marshall Plan countries grew as much as 25%. It put Western European industry back on its feet. The American export economy boomed, and Soviet-influenced communism was contained to Eastern Europe. Nice work, George Marshall. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. The greater honor for Marshall, though, may have been seeing Europe rise from the ashes, thanks in part to the plan that bears his name.
All right, so let's continue on. We know a little bit more about the Marshall Plan.